Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sleep Mechanics and Strategy Talk series. Now, in this episode, I wanted to discuss what 5 Pokemon that I think need a buff in this game are. Now, when I discuss the concept of needing a buff, I don't want to just include all the worst Pokemon of the game. A lot of these are some of the worst Pokemon of the game, but that's not what I think necessarily means it needs a buff. A Pokemon that needs a buff, in my opinion, is one that there really is no reason to invest into it or to hunt it. There's no particular niche where it is the best option over an alternative option that also exists in the game. Now, some of these Pokemon can be good. If you have a Pokemon that has the right subskills in nature, then it can be better than neutral nature or neutral subskills in nature on an alternative that's theoretically a better species. But if that's the case, then you're realistically just being hurt for using the Pokemon that you caught. It's like RNG just decided, oh, you got this one that's the worst option compared to the better option that could have been even stronger if that was the one you caught that day and got those subskills in nature on. So I wanted to discuss the Pokemon that are like that realistically, in the current state of the game, there is no real reason to use them aside from getting lucky on their subskills in nature to the point where you have one that has the right stats. And that's very important for certain things because you won't see certain Pokemon here that would typically come to mind when you think of things that might need a buff. And you might see some Pokemon here that you wouldn't think I would classify as need a buff. But knowing that standard, I hope that can be understood. Now, first Pokemon that I'm going to get into, and this is kind of the topic that caused me to be inspired to make this video, is Persian. Um, and to a greater extent, all of the Dream Shard Magnet fixed Pokemon, because this is a really, really sad comparison, in my opinion. You look here, and you see all of the... If you see on my screen right now, all of the Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon, what they're really trying to do is produce Dream Shards. And as you can see here, the only one that's outproducing even Sableye here is Lucario. But one very noticeable difference here is that I've given all of the fixed ones Skill Trigger M. I haven't given that to the 2 variable options. In fact, Swalot produces more Dream Shards without Skill Trigger, any sort of Skill Trigger subskills, compared to all of the fixed variable ones, or the fixed outcome Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon. These 3 Pokemon have just been done very dirty. They should be producing at least comparable amounts to these 2 options, but the fact that you could have an entire 36% increase to their skill trigger rate and yet still be worse than the best variable option is just horrendous. There is something to be said about running these Pokemon on their favorite berry islands. You know, maybe you produce a little bit of Dream Shards, while at the same time also getting some strength at the same time. But realistically, even with Berry Finding S, I mean, they're not really competing in even the slightest bit regard of the berry specialists of the same island. I mean, even if we just bring in Eradicate to compare with Persian, per se. I mean, a level 60 Eradicate, let's just see here real quick. Don't even give it any subskills or nature, and yeah, it's already producing significantly more raw strength, and that's before even taking into account, like, normal type berry. Then it gets even more crazy. So, there really isn't much of a reason to try and use these 3 Pokemon, or to try and hunt them, especially, when the other options exist, especially Swalot. Swalot is the kingpin of this subgenre of Pokemon. Now, if I give these guys the Skill Trigger M to actually show you guys the true comparison, you can really see just how drastic the difference is. The Swalot almost doubles what the Persian can make. And on top of that, some of these guys don't even get an evolution form, or evolution level, like the Holiday Hat Pikachu or the Sableye. Whereas Swalot, Lucario, and Persian all do to get 1 free skill. So there's really just, like, it's just like Swalot is like the only one really worth any investment currently. Maybe Sableye, if you catch a good one. I mean, I guess these ones, if you catch a good one, that is always the asterisk. Subskills matter more than species in most circumstances, but realistically, in this circumstance, only really hunt for the Swalot if you want a Dream Shard Magnet Pokemon. In the current meta of these game, all of these guys, I would say, need some kind of a buff. Alrighty then. The next one I want to discuss is Comfey. Comfey's a really weird Pokemon because it's in the past it's had some bit of a niche, but I feel like that niche has kind of fallen off. See, the big thing with Comfey in the past was it used to be the only Pokemon available before Lapis Lakeside that had corn on its ingredient list before level 60. And that gave it a niche of early game players would catch a Comfey just to unlock corn so that it was in ingredient tickets and in the pool of what Vaporeon or Heracross could pull in the ingredient magnet main skill. Well, now that can be done with Drifloon. Drifloon, if you know, it's got corn at base, and this is a much easier catch. It's only a 5-pip Pokemon. It's much less rare. It shows up a decent amount more than what Comfey does. And when it does show up, you don't have to spend as many Poke Biscuits on it. So it lost that niche. Now the only real niche that Comfey has is that it is the only true corn farmer, because the Drifloon, I mean, you're not getting good amounts of corn out of this guy. It's just there to unlock the corn. But as far as the corn production goes, it is just sad. I mean, if you look here, Comfey, at level 60, produces about 69 corn a day. This Beware I have it compared to, producing a little bit less, but roughly the same amount. One very big difference, though, is I've put this Beware at level 50. This one doesn't even have the level 60 proc unlocked, which is a huge deal for ingredient farmers. In fact, I bet I could even put this down to level 30, and it would be pretty comparable still. 65 to 69. And yet, if I push him up to level 60 and get that third corn proc, it is not even close in the slightest for how much corn it produces. So it's really outdone for corn. And keep in mind, this is a 16-pip Pokemon, this is a 5-pip. Then, maybe Ginger. Let's consider Ginger. I mean, the only other real Ginger option out there, Kangaskhan, also 16-pip Pokemon. Tyranitar is a pseudo-legendary, so it's a lot more difficult to level and evolve. So maybe you want an easier Gingermon. Well, if you saw get it to level 60, I mean, Charizard outdoes it. And that's a 5-pip. It's a starter, so you might have one at the beginning of the game, honestly. If you want if you're fine with going an ABB route. And Kangaskhan is also right there, same sort of cost investment. It might be a little bit easier to get the Comfey, just because it's an ABB list instead of an AAA list you'd be looking for, so it's twice as common of a list. But if you do manage to catch the Kangaskhan, it's significantly better, obviously, than what the Comfey is, being a mono list versus a ABB option. The only real thing that Comfey has going for it over some of these other options is it does have a very unique skill, that being Energizing Cheer, which isn't really on... Energy recovery is a very rarely distributed thing in this game, because it is very powerful. You can tell the devs have made a very intentional thing. Energy for everyone is only on skills Pokemon. There's a reason for that, because otherwise it might be imbalanced. But the energy recovery you're getting from this is obviously supplementary to what you get off an Energy for Everyone Pokemon, and it's not going to be making any sort of significant impact. It might help if you have like an energy recovery down nature Pokemon on the team that needs just a little bit more, just because that skill is more likely to proc on the Pokemon that has the lowest amount of energy. But overall, it's not making any significant impact enough that it's going to be making anything different from, say, the charge strength on a Beware, or the extra random ingredients off the Charizard. Or what is Kangaskhan skill? Ingredient Magnet. Didn't know that one. Extra ingredients off the Kangaskhan. Overall, there just is no real reason to hunt this guy. Theoretically, if you need corn pre-Lapis and you want, like, you have a meal out there that you're like, ooh, I'm so close to making that meal, I just need the corn farmer. It's just you're not going to catch a good Comfey before you unlock Lapis. I'm just going to be honest with you. Statistically, like, most likely you're not going to catch a good Corn Farmer off of a Comfey before you reach Lapis that's going to satisfy your needs, because Comfey is that terrible of a Pokemon in this game. Just wait until you get to Lapis, hunt Beware, hunt Dratini. They're both going to be better options. They're both 5 pip options that spawn relatively frequently. Comfey won't satisfy that need, despite it looking like the early game corn farming option. And it also lost that niche of being the way to unlock corn as well. Now, next one I want to talk about is Altaria. Altaria is a weird one because it's a berry specialist. The reason why I think it needs a buff is because, I mean, just look at this. I'm comparing Altaria to Dragonite. Dragonite, yeah, it's a pseudo-legendary, so it does cost more for investment, but it's also an ingredient specialist. And when it comes to berry production, realistically, you're looking for berry production. You're looking at the combination of berries and raw value of ingredients, because most likely you're probably not filling the pot, or you are filling the pot all the way. But if you have excess space in the pot, which I don't know too many people that have problems with overflowing ingredients, unless you're not the best with managing your pot. But overall, you should be able to fit those raw ingredients in. And if you're using it as a berry specialist, then realistically, you just put in favored berry, and you use the excess ingredients as filler. Then the Dragonite is so much better than Altaria as a Dragon Berry specialist. Even if you get it to level 60, sure, the Altaria is producing more berries overall, but when you consider net value, this one over here has Help Speed S. I even gave it Help Speed S, and it's still the worst berry specialist when you consider overall total strength and not just raw value. Now, this is assuming for level 60 as the current level cap. If we were to adjust this, then it would maybe look a little bit different, but even level 75, it's looking sad for Altaria. Let's see if we take it all the way to level 100. I didn't even do this comparison beforehand. Level 100, they're about the same with Berry Finding S and Berry Finding S alone. That should not be the case. There should be no circumstance where a berry specialist is outperformed or even equal with an ingredient specialist for raw value when it has favored berry. An ingredient specialist should shine when you're using their ingredients in a meal, and that time only. If you're not doing that, then why would you ever consider the Altaria? I guess, like I said, Dragonite's an expensive investment. Not everyone's going to have Berry Finding S on it, but it's just... It just is a good metric to demonstrate that Altaria needs a buff. Alrighty, then, this is probably one of the weirder ones that you probably weren't expecting to be on this list. But personally, I think Primeape needs a buff, and I think there's a very easy buff they could give it. It just takes a little bit of time, but, or it might just take a little more time before the devs actually introduce it. But, as you can see here, comparing Primeape to Meganium. Now, I make this comparison because Primeape and Meganium, they are almost carbon copies of each other, aside from berry typing, which is a very big difference, and I guess ingredient list as well. But overall, they have the same island, so their berries are effectively the same. And they have the same exact skill. And Primeape, lower skill rate. Meganium produces a little less berries, but not a whole lot. Oh wait, no. Sorry, I made this comparison as if it had Help Speed M. Primeape, less skill rate, less berry production, less raw ingredient value. There is arguably no reason to invest into a Primeape over a Meganium, other than, like I said, if you have the right sub-skills in nature. Even if you give it Help Speed M, the comparison still looks about the same between the two of them. There is no reason why we should do this. This should not look like this. My biggest recommendation to the devs would be just add Annihilate. It gives a niche for the Primeape, because it's not fully evolved. In fact, I almost wonder if that was the intention of the devs when the game first came out, that they'd be thinking, maybe eventually Annihilate will be in the game. We don't want it to be the same as Meganium in power level, because then when eventually Annihilate comes out, that's just going to be broken. But we're at a point that they could add Annihilate, and that would fix this problem, even if you give it a 7% buff, which is what you get from a ribbon. The Primeape is still weaker than Meganium, which that isn't busted. Just give it the evolution, and I think it would fix this whole problem of the Primeape being just strictly worse than Meganium. And then the final one, things seem to have gotten a little shifted here from my original plan. Marowak. This should come as no shocker to those that have been viewing the channel for a while. Marowak, I think, is a very sad instance because earlier on, when I was making a lot of the content for Sleep Sleepers, when I was doing my other tier list, it was always like there were 3 berry specialists that I considered the worst in the game. It was always Marowak, Arbok, and Raticate. Were like 3 of them that I said were always the worst in the game. Mostly because of a combination of bad main skill. Charge Energy S is a pretty cruddy main skill for berry specialists. Typically, you want to be leaving them on the team as long as possible. So you're not really getting the flexibility factor of Charge Energy S on a berry specialist. And as well as that, they're also just slow. All 3 of them were bonkers slow, leading to them being pretty terrible as berry specialists. Since then, they've given a buff to Raticate, and they've given a buff to Arbok. Arbok was actually first, then it was Raticate. You want to know who's been left behind? Marowak. And my biggest guess as to why that is just because it has favored berry at a much more significant island than where Raticate's at Snowdrop, which is a worse island. Arbok doesn't have a favored berry yet anywhere at any island, but Marowak still has some significance being at top. Still a pretty good island, but the comparison is just wild. Look at this. I mean, I made the comparison before of Meganium and Primeape and said Primeape deserves a buff. Well, my goodness, if Primeape deserves a buff, then Marowak deserves like a rework or something, because this is a Typhlosion that just has Skill Trigger S. Just Skill Trigger S. I didn't even give him a max level main skill. I just gave him what he'd have at base. And it's outperforming the Marowak. With Berry Finding S, I didn't give the Typhlosion any sort of Berry Finding at all. I gave them both Favored Berry. And the Typhlosion outperforms the Marowak not by much, but this shouldn't be a comparison. This one should be 50% stronger than this one by normal standards of the game with Berry Finding S, with how strong it is, and the fact that Skill Trigger S hardly makes a difference at all for Berry Finders. So, realistically, this guy just needs something. I think a good idea may be in a Alolan form. I know there is a Alolan Marowak, but I wouldn't want to see just always invest in a Alolan Marowak and don't bother with the Cantonian version. I'd like the Cantonian version to be good too, in its own way, so that deciding Alolan versus Cantonian would actually be a decision. But I'm sure there's other ways they give buffs. Just a frequency increase, honestly. That's all it would take. It wouldn't be game-breaking when you have this in comparison to this. So, yeah. As for some of the buffs that I'd suggest, I don't want to see these bad Pokemon become better than their alternatives. So I just say give them some sort of a niche that they could do. Maybe instead of energizing Cheer to give Comfey a bit more interesting and unique stuff, maybe you give it energy for everyone with just a really, really low proc rate so that it is balanced and can't reliably heal the team. I'm not saying that would be the best route, but it would make it more interesting, and maybe it'd be worth consideration then as a ginger farmer or an apple or a corn farmer. Not apple, sorry. Altaria probably just needs speed. Primeape just needs an evolution, and all of these guys, I don't know, give them more skill rate. Like I said, or more frequency so they can produce more strength while also producing skills. Like, there's some interesting things there to be said, and some interesting ideas, but I'm not one of the devs, but I just want to talk about these Pokemon that I think I see little gaps in where their balancing has gone kind of awry, and where I think some of these Pokemon need just a little bit more love. So, if you've enjoyed the discussion, and I'd love to get your guys' opinions down in the comments. I'd love to see what you guys think about this, and if there's any Pokemon that I missed that you think really need a buff. Before making this video, I would have said Wobbuffet as well, but they actually recently buffed Wobbuffet, and as I was reevaluating it, I found that it's not It's still a bad Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but it's not as bad as it was before this buff. This last one was actually pretty significant, but that's a whole different discussion. If you have enjoyed the video, sure leave a like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, I thank you guys for watching, and hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.